From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Wednesday, July 30, 2025. Pro-Palestinian activists say they'll take their fight to court if New South Wales Premier Chris Minns doesn't let them march across the Harbour Bridge this weekend. Schools are turning out more top performers, but NAPLAN results are flatlining overall, and the strongest predictor of kids' performance at school is still their parents' background. Check those stories out right now at theaustralian.com.au. Carbon capture and storage is back in the energy conversation, and investment in wind farms is collapsing. That's as the government backs away from a United Nations climate chief's claim that fruit and veggies might become a once-a-year treat if we don't speed up the energy transition. Today, where are we actually heading on climate? And is cozying up with the UN a good idea? Australia has a long and proud history of attention-grabbing moments in the debate about climate and energy. From Barnaby Joyce...
I don't think your working mothers are going to be very happy when they're paying over $100 for a roast.
...to Scott Morrison...
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared.
The Treasurer knows the rule on crops.
It's coal. It was dug up.
And now a UN climate change czar who says extreme weather events are becoming so frequent we might have to change our diets completely.
Unchecked, climate change would cripple Australia's food production. Today's supermarket price pain will look like a picnic, with mega droughts making fresh fruit and veg a once-a-year treat.
That's a voice actor reading the words of Simon Steele, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and he made his claim in his speech in Sydney. Here's some audio of Simon Steele's speech.
This is the moment to get behind a climate plan that doesn't just write that vision into policy, but delivers in spades for your people. So don't settle for what's easy. Bog standard is beneath you.
Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen, who met with Steele on Tuesday, seemed to recognise Steele's intervention might not be helpful. A voice actor is reading part of a statement the minister released.
Targets are easier set than met. We will set a target informed by the expert advice in the national interest.
Simon Steele is the UN's top climate diplomat. He goes around the world and talks to leaders of countries like Australia about their climate ambitions and essentially presents the UN view, which is often, for pretty much every country, do more, go harder, go as high as you can with those ambitious targets.
Sarah Eisen is a federal political reporter with The Australian.
So he's in Australia now doing exactly that, meeting with Chris Bowen, who calls Simon Steele a friend. They've gotten to know each other on the international circuit. So it's been an interesting time seeing him commentate on Australian politics, really, and climate policy as he engages in this tour.
Simon Steele is a politician in his own right. He was a climate minister in Grenada, the Caribbean island group where sea level rise and extreme storm activity are regarded as existential threats. And when his conservative New National Party was turfed out of power in 2022, Steele joined the UN. He made a fairly startling suggestion about fruit and vegetables. What does that mean?
Yeah, he said that fruit and vegetable will become this sort of once-a-year treat. What he means by that is that without more climate action and more ambitious emission reduction targets, we'll see droughts and other major climate events, essentially meaning that fruits and vegetables won't grow in the same way that we enjoy now, and that they'll be so expensive and or so scarce that it'll be a once-a-year treat to enjoy.
The Albanese government has a goal of net zero by 2050. What's the problem with that, according to Simon Steele?
Well, we need to set ambitious 2035 targets, basically show how we're going to get from here to the 2050 target with that interim target. 2035 needs to be something that, in his view, needs to be really ambitious, set out a blueprint for the near term. Now, that's interesting because by September, the government is expected to announce its 2035 target. It will be interesting to see what that figure is, with sort of widely touted to maybe a 60% figure. I'm sure Simon Steele would want it to be even higher. He's been not too prescriptive when asked directly what does it need to be, but he is obviously saying go hard, go as hard as you can.
Yeah, the federal government's got to meet that 2050 target, of course, but it also has to keep the lights on in the meantime. The Prime Minister's had to defend the government against environmental activists who say he's not going fast enough, making decisions like approving the gas project on the Northwest Shelf to run until 2070. So what are practically the things that the government might be considering doing to go faster?
On Tuesday, Chris Bowen's announced a 25% increase to the Climate Capacity Investment Scheme. Basically, this scheme is about underwriting renewable energy generation like wind and solar. So by increasing the investment in that scheme, you're trying to really boost those renewables, particularly with that target of more than 80% of our electricity being generated by those renewables in the very near future. But the government will just, I think, double down in the way and the direction that it's charted so far. It will, of course, not just do a hard pivot, though, from some of the traditional energy sources, as you mentioned, the Northwest Shelf. And Albanese and Chris Bowen are trying to walk the line of not seeing any huge increase to power prices or market disruption, while really delivering on what they say is very much their mandate in being ambitious when it comes to climate change and environmental protection.
Every year, nations from around the world meet at a UN Conference of Parties, also known as COP. It's where big decisions on climate are made. Australia and Turkey both want to host COP31 in 2026, and it's turned into quite the diplomatic standoff, with neither country willing to graciously step aside for the other to get the gig. If Australia hosts, it'd be in partnership with our Pacific Island neighbours.
I think we saw after Albanese won the 2022 election, and we've seen that since, is he likes to seem very presidential on the international stage. And for Australia to host this, it would be a huge historic moment. And I think for someone who wants to make a huge mark on the country, but also the country's place in the world, Albanese's really keen on landing this. The other side of that coin is the scrutiny that goes along with it. Now, the Prime Minister and Energy Minister have talked for a long time that COP needs to be here in Australia because it's also surrounded by Pacific Island nations. That's been quite clear. And the problem is that they have been demanding for some time, not just under the coalition government, not under the Labor government, for much more to be done on climate change, much more ambition to be taken, for this to really be given the seriousness that it deserves in their eyes when they see the issue of climate change as an existential threat. So for Australia to host this and then potentially be criticised or told to go further by the very colleagues on the international stage that it's hosting this event with those Pacific Island nations, I mean, that could generate quite a lot of bad press, scrutiny, criticism of the Albanese government. So there's definitely risk that comes with it. But I think the Labor government is seeing it as something that would still be a historic moment and a huge win for them in the long term.
Climate has been a landmine for many Australian Prime Ministers. It's cost the careers of several, as we've thrashed out the debate over first whether climate change was real and then what to do about it. For Anthony Albanese at the last election, certainly, the Greens were basically wiped off the table in terms of the House of Representatives. He doesn't now have to worry about making sure that he's winning votes from the Greens of people who care about climate change. So why the need to grandstand on the international stage about this?
I mean, that said, the Greens still do hold the balance of power in the Senate and will try to use that to push Albanese and Labor to be ambitious on environment. Why the need to grandstand beyond that? I mean, if you look at the other nations, those that would be part of COP, but G7, G20, I think Albanese, he's on the world stage quite a lot. He enjoys going to those summits, even if it's just on the sidelines, and wants to be seen as a really serious player in a number of ways, but particularly in climate change and the environment. So I think it's something that he still sees as very central as an international leadership moment. And again, the Greens will still be highly critical of an Albanese government that was given such a smashing mandate but didn't do anything with it for the climate. So that is also what some voters, particularly of the left, will think of. A lot of people asked after the election, well, okay, you got this huge mandate. What are you going to do?
Coming up, the climate debate raging inside the coalition. Back at the top of this episode, you heard Barnaby Joyce, the Nationals MP who shot to fame talking about $100 lamb roasts back in 2012. It was a warning back then about a carbon tax. Joyce is back in this game now, teaming up with a former Nats leader, Michael McCormack, to make life difficult for opposition leader Susan Lee by arguing the coalition should oppose the net zero target. Joyce has always been a green energy skeptic. McCormack, though, had been more centrist.
That was a surprise to not only us up here in the press gallery, but actually a lot of his colleagues, frankly. A lot of them told me they've lost a bit of respect for Michael, who's always been seen as someone who's very sensible and middle of the road. So that really reheated this huge debate on net zero. That said, Nationals say definitely more than half of their party room don't support net zero. The question is what to do about that. They want a kind of graceful dismount from this policy, whereas Barnaby and McCormack going out quite publicly without consulting colleagues and doing a bunch of interviews and doorstops and so on, continuing to spruik this while the coalition tries to do a more sensible review and get all the voices heard. It caused a lot of frustration within the coalition ranks and really was very much welcomed by the government, who felt like they could sit back this sitting fortnight and watch the coalition fight amongst themselves.
Investment in the future of energy is really hard. Green hydrogen has basically failed now in Australia, with backers pulling out of giant projects that they'd attempted. We're running a story in The Australian on Wednesday about how wind farm investment in Australia has ground to a halt. Do you feel, Sarah, as though the government kind of has big ideas beyond a slight increase in the subsidies that they're giving to people who are prepared to put their money on the line for these kinds of investments?
Albanese has said on a number of occasions that this decade will define decades to come. And he means that for a number of different sectors and metrics, but particularly in the environment and the climate. And he sees himself and his government as being at the helm of that decade. And I think with language like that, with what some might call ideas of grandeur like that, I think it would be surprising for there not to be a real doubling down and further investment, further release of really ambitious policy in this way. He and the greater party want to leave their mark, and the climate is a really key area where they feel they can do that. But as you've pointed out regarding some of those challenges, lack of investment and so on, it's a pretty big hill to climb.
Sarah Eisen is a political reporter with The Australian. You can read all our coverage of federal, state and local politics anytime at theaustralian.com.au.